The night was cold, quiet, too quiet. Rain fell in thin, whispering sheets as headlights sliced through the fog. Emily, 17th, walked alone down the suburban street, hoodie soaked and phone pressed to her ear. "Mom, I'm 5 minutes away," she said, voice slightly shaken. She paused, noticing a black van parked awkwardly across the street with its engine running. Her instincts twitched. Her pace quickened. Behind her, footsteps, deliberate, heavy. She turned sharply. "How?" "Nothing. And just the rain." "Wonderful." "Mom," she whispered, panic rising. A sudden burst, hand over her mouth, the phone clattered to the wet ground. A muffled scream. Struggle. Silence. The van door slammed shut. Then, only the soft hiss of the rain remained, soaking the phone's blinking screen and the backpack lying in the gutter. The darkness swallowed the street whole. Emily was gone. Across town, Emily's mother, Susan, paced near the window, phone clutched in her trembling hand. She had replayed her daughter's last words over and over. "I'm 5 minutes away." That was 15 minutes ago. The clock ticked louder than her heartbeat. Outside, rain battered the windows. Susan muttered, "Come on, baby." Her anxiety wasn't new. Emily had always been her fragile thread to hope after her husband died 2 years ago. Tonight felt different. A chill had crept into her bones, an intuition sharpened by years of maternal instinct. She dialed again. No answer. Voicemail. Her breath hitched. "Something's wrong," she whispered, reaching for her coat. She rushed out the door, unaware that her daughter's last known location would soon become the center of a nightmare. Officer Jalen Rivers pulled into the station just before midnight. The rain hadn't let up, and neither had the tension gnawing at his gut. Dispatch crackled. "A missing persons report. 17-year-old female, last known location near Brighton Street," the voice said. Jalen froze. Brighton. His patrol route. He leaned into the mic. "Dispatch, I'll take it." As he sped toward the site, wipers swiping frantically, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another runaway. Something about the voice of the mother on the report haunted him. Desperation. Fear. When he arrived, he saw the backpack, the phone. The rain hadn't washed it all away. Not yet. He knelt, flashlight trembling slightly. "Where are you, kid?" he muttered. The night held its breath. The scene was being taped off when Susan arrived. She saw the flashing lights first, then the yellow tape, then her daughter's backpack. A scream tore from her throat as she tried to push past officers. "That's my daughter's," she yelled. It took 2 patrolmen to hold her back. Detective Rivers approached, calm but firm. "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can," he said. But Susan was already collapsing, sobbing into her hands. Her world had tilted violently, and now she was suspended in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Behind her, cameras began flashing. Reporters smelled blood. A mother's grief was now public spectacle. Detective Rivers turned to his team. "This isn't a normal abduction," he said quietly. "This feels planned." Back at the vanishing point, a figure stood cloaked in shadows, watching. The van had disappeared minutes ago, but the observer remained. Silent. Calculating. A burner phone in hand. Gloved fingers dialed. Calm voice answered. "Is it done?" The reply. "Yes, she's in." No emotion. No hesitation. The call ended. The figure stepped back into the alleyway, vanishing into the maze of wet streets. This wasn't random. This wasn't desperation. This was execution, methodical and chilling. And it was only the beginning. Beneath the streetlight, the phone blinked one last time before dying, like the final heartbeat of innocence. Susan sat motionless in the hospital's family waiting area, wrapped in a wool blanket that did nothing to stop her shivering. A detective's voice echoed in her mind, "We're looking into every angle." Empty words. Her mind spiraled, reliving Emily's last call, how normal her voice sounded. 5 minutes away. What if she'd picked her up instead? What if she'd pushed harder when Emily said she'd walk? She looked down at her trembling hands. I failed her, she whispered. Her sister, Karen, sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her back. This isn't your fault. Susan didn't respond. Her face was hollow, as if grief had scooped her out from within. The hallway clock ticked on. Every second was a second too long. Somewhere, her daughter was alone. Somewhere, Emily was scared. And Susan could do nothing but sit and wait, and remember. Emily's room remained untouched. Teddy bear on the bed. Books stacked beside the lamp. Half a homework sheet still on the desk. Answers scrawled in pink pen. Detective Rivers stood at the doorway, his eyes scanning the walls for anything. Photos, posters, journals, that might whisper a clue. She's neat, he said softly. Karen nodded. She's always been organized. She liked control. Rivers stepped closer, lifting a photo from the nightstand. Emily smiled from the picture, arms around her dog, sunlight pouring in from behind. Was she seeing anyone? He asked. Karen hesitated. She mentioned a boy, quiet. I never met him. Rivers narrowed his gaze. We'll need his name. Somewhere in this room, between the stillness and echoes, was a thread. And he would pull until something unraveled. Emily awoke to darkness. Her wrists burned, plastic ties chafing her skin. The floor beneath her was metal, cold and vibrating. A moving vehicle. Panic surged. Her mouth was taped, muffling her cries. Her breathing quickened as she took in her surroundings. Metal walls, bolted shelves, no windows. She wasn't alone. A girl maybe a few years younger sat huddled across from her, eyes swollen from crying. The girl looked at Emily, and for a second something passed between them, fear but also connection. Emily shifted toward her, eyes pleading, but the girl only turned away. Emily realized this wasn't the beginning for her cellmate. It was the middle, or worse, the end. Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she clutched a scrap of fabric near her foot. Her hoodie. She wasn't dreaming. This was real. At the precinct, Rivers laid out a timeline on the board. She left school at 6:12, phone pinged near Brighton at 6:22, call dropped at 6:25. Photos of the scene, backpack, and Emily's face were pinned with red threads connecting them. We canvassed the area, he continued, but no one saw anything, no security footage either. One officer raised a hand. There's a blind spot. 3 blocks between cameras. Rivers nodded grimly. Perfect for a grab, too perfect. He tapped on a map. But the Vaughn's path ends here, and that's where we'll start over. He stared at the board, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just a case now. It was personal. He'd seen too many girls vanish into silence. He wouldn't let Emily become another cold file. The younger girl in the van, Maya, finally spoke. They took me a month ago. Her voice cracked. Emily's eyes widened. A month. They keep us until... She trailed off. Emily leaned forward, desperate for more. Maya whispered, You have to behave. Do what they say. Don't fight. Emily shook her head, eyes burning. No, she tried to mouth. I'm getting out. Maya's expression didn't change. Everyone says that. Footsteps echoed outside. A door unlocked. Both girls stiffened, hearts racing. Emily grabbed Maya's hand instinctively. The door creaked open, flooding the space with white light. A shadow loomed in the doorway. Male. Male. Silent. Tight. Observing. Then the voice, calm, cold, detached. Time to go. The door slammed behind them. And the van fell into silence again. Detective Rivers stood before Emily's school principal, flipping through the girl's attendance record. She started skipping after midterms, he noted aloud. Stress. The principal nodded. Her grades dropped. She seemed distracted, tired. She once fell asleep in class. Rivers asked, Did anyone report unusual behavior? The principal hesitated. One teacher did, said. Emily was withdrawn, wouldn't meet her eyes. She claimed she was being followed, but no one could confirm it. Rivers's brow furrowed. He closed the file slowly. Why didn't anyone dig deeper? The principal shrugged helplessly. We thought it was anxiety. Rivers stood. No one vanishes without a whisper. You just didn't want to hear it. As he walked out, the pieces began to shift. Someone had been watching Emily long before that night. In a darkened surveillance room, Officer Lena Torres scrubbed through hours of nearby security footage. Blurred figures. Cars, dot. Rain smearing the lens. Then, movement. A van turning sharply onto a side street near Brighton. I got you, she whispered. She enhanced the frame. Partial plate. Dark van. Same model described. She replayed it, twice, 3 times. Another camera, a few blocks later, caught a similar van passing beneath a flickering traffic light. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, mapping the path. The van didn't vanish, she muttered. It went somewhere it knew couldn't be traced. She flagged the video and called Rivers. I've got a route, she said. He replied, send it. We follow this all the way down. And suddenly they had a direction. A digital trail in a world of shadows. Back inside the van, Emily sat hunched beside Maya. The girl hadn't spoken in hours. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a man, it was a woman. Cold-eyed, mid-40s, dressed in surgical scrubs. Number 14, she called. Maya flinched. Stand. Emily gripped her hand tighter, but Maya let go. Her voice was hollow. It's my turn. She stepped into the light, and the door shut behind her. Emily screamed into her gag, thrashing violently, rage overpowering fear. The metal walls echoed her fury. The woman didn't flinch. Keep screaming. It won't help. Emily stared at the door, tears mixing with sweat. What were they doing to her? What was this place? She felt something rising inside her, not just terror. Defiance. And the need to escape. Susan sat in Emily's room, now surrounded by boxes of her daughter's belongings. Grief made her move, folding clothes, opening drawers. Then she found it, a spiral notebook, pages scribbled in pink and black. Doodles. Names. Half-written poems. One page was different. There's someone outside my window. 3rd night in a row. Karen doesn't believe me. Susan's breath caught. She flipped further. I don't think it's random. He knows where I go. Panic clawed at her chest. Please believe me. The final entry stopped her cold. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. Susan staggered back, tears returning. Emily had been crying for help, and no one had listened. She grabbed the notebook and ran to the phone. Detective Rivers, she said breathlessly. You need to see this, now. In a grimy warehouse far from town, Maya sat slumped in a plastic chair, dazed. Her wrists bore new bruises. A man stood nearby, late 50s, thick glasses, clipboard in hand. She's small, too bruised, he muttered. Another man entered. What about the new one? The older girl, the first replied. Healthy, good eyes. Untouched. He scribbled something down. Schedule her next. Behind a glass pane, Emily watched it unfold, her body rigid with horror. They were cataloging them. Like cattle. Her heartbeat thundered. She didn't care about the pain anymore. She looked around, metal shelves, a vent, a table with tools. She memorized everything. Her time was coming. And when it did, she wouldn't go quietly. Not anymore. Detective Rivers held the notebook in his hands, scanning Emily's final words. It was more than a cry for help, it was a trail. One name kept reappearing, Mr. Keller. Rivers flipped through his database. Nothing. Then Susan spoke quietly. That's her math tutor. She said he made her uncomfortable. A slow dread crept over Rivers. He picked up the phone. Run Keller through every known alias and background. Minutes later, results poured in. Keller wasn't real. The tutor had used a fake ID. Worse, he'd once been investigated in another state, but the file had disappeared. Rivers stared at the screen. "We missed him," he muttered. He turned to Susan, his voice low and tight. "This man, he's not a tutor. He's a predator, and he's been in your home." Inside the warehouse, Emily was dragged into a different room. Sterile, cold, clinical. Strapped to a chair, she faced Mr. Keller for the first time. But he wasn't wearing a friendly smile now. "You remember me?" he asked casually. Emily's eyes flared. He smirked. "I told you not to be so curious." Curiosity. It leads people places they don't return from. He held a syringe in one hand. "This doesn't have to be painful," he added. Emily spat through the gag. Keller stepped closer. Still defiant. "Good." But just as he raised the syringe, an alarm blared somewhere in the building. Red lights flashed. Keller's smile faded. "Stay here," he growled. Emily's heart pounded. She wasn't sure what triggered the alarm, but she had seconds, and they might be her last chance. Back at the precinct, Torres burst into Rivers's office. "We've got something," she said, breathless. She threw down a case file, 10 years old. Same method. Same van and victims never found. But one name stood out, the lead investigator, Lieutenant Harris. Rivers blinked. "He retired early," Torres said, "after the case got buried." Rivers pulled Harris's file. "A private address. No forwarding." "We're reopening this now," Rivers ordered. Hours later, he stood at Harris's door. The old man answered slowly, tired eyes hiding something heavier than age. "You're here about the girls," Harris said before Rivers could speak. "You're not the first to look, but they'll bury you too." And just like that, the case had a new enemy, the system itself. Emily fought the bindings with everything she had. The alarm had stopped, replaced by urgent footsteps outside. She looked around, scissors on a tray, just out of reach. She twisted, dislocated her shoulder with a muffled scream, and pushed herself toward the tray. Her fingers bled. She grabbed the scissors and sliced through the restraints, collapsing onto the floor. Pain blurred her vision. She crawled to the door, cracked it open. The hallway was empty. She could run. Or find Maya. She forced herself up, swaying. "Don't leave her," she whispered to herself. Her survival wasn't enough anymore. They'd taken everything from her. She wouldn't let them take Maya too. Emily disappeared into the hallway, a ghost on a mission. In a hidden room deep within the warehouse, Maya lay on a table, motionless. A man adjusted surgical instruments. Then, bang. The door burst open. Emily, breathless, wild-eyed, stood in the frame holding a scalpel. "Step away from her," she rasped. The man laughed. "You can't save her. You can't save anyone." Emily lunged. The scalpel slashed across his arm. He howled and staggered back. She grabbed Maya's hand. "We're leaving." The man reached for something. Emily didn't wait. She struck again, this time harder. Maya stirred, blinking. "You came back," she whispered. Emily pulled her up. "Always." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Emily turned toward the hallway. One way out. One chance. Debila. She wasn't leaving anyone behind. Not again. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Sirens blared outside, SWAT vehicles flooding the perimeter. Inside, Emily dragged Maya through the corridors, each step a fight against exhaustion. A voice shouted through the building's intercom. "Do not resist. You are surrounded." Emily pulled Maya behind a metal shelf as armed footsteps thundered past. "They're here," she whispered. Maya whimpered. "We won't make it." Emily looked at her with fire in her eyes. "We already did." She scanned the hallway, spotting an exit sign glowing red through the smoke. Just then, Keller appeared, gun drawn, face twisted with fury. "You should have stayed quiet," he screamed. Emily pushed Maya behind her. "You'll never touch her again." Outside, spotlights turned the night into day. Inside, the final standoff had begun. Outside, Detective Rivers coordinated with SWAT. "We have 2 minors alive inside," he shouted into his comm. "One suspect armed and dangerous." Officers breached the rear entrance with precision. "Move, move, move!" Bodies flooded the corridors. Rivers charged in behind them, gun drawn, eyes scanning. He passed by cold metal doors, bloodstains on the ground, flickering bulbs. Then he heard it. A scream. A gunshot. "Emily," he whispered, running toward the sound. Rounding the corner, he saw her. Emily stood over Keller's fallen body, trembling, the gun kicked far across the floor. Maya cried in the corner. Rivers lowered his weapon slowly. "It's over," he said, voice soft but steady. Emily collapsed into his arms, breath hitching. "We're still here," she whispered. "We're still here." Paramedics rushed Maya and Emily to the waiting ambulances. Susan broke through the crowd, screaming Emily's name. Their eyes met, then collided in a tearful embrace. "You came back to me," Susan sobbed. Emily whispered, "I never stopped trying." Maya, lying on a stretcher, looked at the mother and daughter, her eyes full of longing. Susan turned, approached and gently took Maya's hand. "You're not alone," she said. Flashbulbs exploded from nearby reporters. A story was breaking. But to Susan, the only thing that mattered was that her daughter had survived, and that another child had been saved too. As the ambulance doors closed, Susan held both girls close. For the first time in days, she breathed. Inside the interrogation room, Keller sat handcuffed, blood on his sleeve, eyes blank. Across from him, Detective Rivers leaned forward. "You were part of something bigger. Who else is involved?" Keller didn't blink. "You think arresting me stops it," he said. "This isn't new. We've existed longer than you've been breathing." Rivers slammed a folder on the table. Photos, maps, names. "You're done." Keller smiled. "You found one door. There are 100 more." Silence thickened. Rivers stood, fists clenched. "We'll find them," Keller whispered. "Maybe. But will it matter?" As the detective walked out, the room fell still again, just a man in chains and a secret far from over. Later that night, Emily sat alone in the hospital corridor, legs pulled to her chest. Clean clothes, bandaged arms, but eyes still haunted. A nurse passed by, offering a soft smile. Emily barely registered it. Then Maya walked in, holding 2 juice boxes. "Trade you," she said quietly, holding one out. Emily smiled faintly and took it. They sat in silence, side by side. "I thought I was going to die," Maya said. Emily replied, "Me too." A pause. Then Emily added, "But we didn't." Maya nodded. "Because you fought." Emily looked down at her bruised hands. "Because I had to." The silence returned, but it felt lighter. The night wasn't over. But for the first time, it wasn't pitch black. The courtroom was quiet, filled with tension. Keller sat at the defendant's table, no longer smug, just hollow. Susan held Emily's hand tightly as she prepared to speak. She rose, her voice trembling but firm. "My daughter was taken, tortured, nearly lost forever. And you," she pointed toward Keller, "you watched her cry and did nothing." Keller stared ahead unmoved. The judge listened silently. "But she survived," Susan continued. "You didn't break her, and that's your failure." Emily watched, eyes glassy, pride swelling in her chest. Susan sat down, and the prosecutor followed with devastating precision. As the jury exited to deliberate, Emily leaned to her mother and whispered, "Whatever happens now, we're free of him." And for the first time, Susan believed her. Back at home, Emily opened the front door slowly. The house felt different. Smaller, quieter, too still. She walked to her bedroom and stood at the threshold. Everything was as she left it. Same bed, same lamp, same photos. Yet nothing felt familiar. She stepped inside, brushing her fingers along the dresser. A framed picture of her and Susan at the beach caught her eye. She picked it up and smiled faintly. Then she placed it face down. It didn't feel like her anymore. The mirror reflected someone else. Someone changed. Someone who had survived hell. She sat on the bed, unsure if she should cry or breathe. Then she whispered, "I'm still me, I think." The quiet answered, not with comfort, but with space. Detective Rivers stood at the department board, pinning new red threads across a growing web of photos and files. "Keller was one spoke," he said to Torres. "But this wheel is bigger. Photos of warehouses, names without faces, and foreign transactions painted the map with menace." Torres handed him a file. Interpol flagged one name. Keller's alias appeared in 2 other missing child cases, in Europe. Rivers exhaled. Global operation. He turned toward the window. The reflection looking back wasn't just a detective. It was a man haunted by the faces of those still lost. "We started something," he murmured. Torres nodded. "Then we finish it." The storm hadn't passed. But now they had direction. And they would chase it to the end. Susan stood in the kitchen, making tea. Simple, quiet. But her hands shook. Emily entered silently, watching her. "You don't have to pretend," Emily said. Susan turned, startled. "I'm not," she replied softly. "I'm just trying to find normal again." Emily nodded, stepping closer. "What if we can't?" A long pause. Susan finally said, "Then we make a new one." They stood in silence, the kettle beginning to whistle. "I'm scared," Emily admitted. "Me too," Susan said. "But I'm more afraid of losing you again. So we start here." Emily smiled faintly. "Okay, 1 cup at a time." The whistle stopped. And for the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. Not because of grief, but because of healing. Maya stared out the window of her temporary foster home. A small garden. A swing. Peaceful. But silence still scared her. When the knock came, she hesitated. Slowly, she opened the door, and Emily stood there, holding a small bag. "Thought you could use some company," she said. Maya blinked, then smiled, fragile but real. They sat outside on the swing, not speaking at first. Just swaying. Finally Maya whispered, "Do you ever feel like it didn't happen to you?" Emily nodded. "Sometimes. Other times I feel every second of it." A breeze moved through the trees. Maya said, "I'm glad you came back." Emily smiled. "I had to. You saved me too." And for a moment they both stopped surviving, and simply existed. Emily returned to school. The halls buzzed with noise, but it all felt distant. Eyes followed her, some curious, some concerned, others simply unsure. She kept her head high. Locker 214 still creaked when opened. Inside were her old textbooks, a photo taped to the back wall, slightly faded. She touched it gently, then closed the door. In class, whispers died as she entered. The teacher paused. "Welcome back, Emily." She nodded quietly and sat down. As the lesson began, she opened her notebook, her hand trembling just slightly. Not from fear, but from the effort of reclaiming space. She wasn't the same girl who disappeared. She was a survivor stepping into her own shadow, and learning not to fear it anymore. Detective Rivers stood alone on the pier, wind cutting across the water. He lit a cigarette he wouldn't smoke, just for the ritual of it. The case was technically closed. Keller sentenced. The press had moved on, but Rivers hadn't. His board still held faces, some found, some not. He pulled out a small slip of paper. Emily had sent it. One line, "You didn't give up. That saved me." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Behind him, The city lights flickered alive. He took a breath and turned away from the water. A case was waiting across state lines. Another girl missing. And this time he wouldn't wait for red tape to catch up. He was already moving. Susan sat in group therapy, surrounded by mothers with vacant stares and breaking hearts. Her hands were clenched in her lap, but her voice was steady. I thought my daughter was gone, and I thought I was too. A pause. But she came back, and so did I. Heads nodded. Some cried. A woman beside her whispered, "You're lucky." Susan replied softly, "Yes, and I owe it to every mother here to fight for the ones still out there." Later, as she left, the group leader handed her a volunteer form. Susan stared at the header, Survivor Advocacy Network. She signed without hesitation. Her voice had been born out of pain. Now, it would speak for those still unheard. Emily stood in front of a mirror, the same one she used to avoid. She brushed her fingers across her collarbone, pausing at the faint scar on her shoulder. Her breath caught, then steadied. Behind her, Maya waited, holding a pair of beaded friendship bracelets. "They're kind of lame," Maya said. Emily smiled. "They're perfect." She tied one onto Maya's wrist, then held out her own. "We're not what happened to us," Emily said, voice quiet but certain. "We're what we choose to become after." Maya nodded solemnly. They left the room hand in hand, sunlight spilling across the hallway. Their story wasn't over. But now, they were the ones writing it. In a classroom months later, Emily stood at a podium, speaking to younger students. "There was a time I thought I'd never feel safe again, that my voice was gone forever." She paused, scanning the room. "But your voice doesn't disappear. Even if it's stolen, even if it's silenced, it waits for you to reclaim it." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "You don't have to be loud. You just have to be real, and brave enough to start." Her eyes flicked to Susan and Maya in the back row. Maya gave a quiet thumbs up. Emily smiled. "This isn't the end of my story. It's the part where I begin to write it myself." And for the first time, her voice didn't shake.